Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Fintech South panel discussion, Digital Transformation, Banking in the Next Normal. I'm Holly Hughes, Chief Marketing Officer of BAI, and I'm joined today by Ken Meyer, Chief Information Officer, Digital Channels and Innovation at Truist. Welcome, Ken. We also have Allyson Laurance, who is Head of Strategic Partnerships and Innovation, North America at Citi. Hi, Allyson. And then Dibs, Shekhar, who is Senior Director, Product at Comcast Business. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you with us today for this discussion. You know, this is certainly a big topic, one of the key areas that has been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, as banks had to quickly adapt their operations, and many consumers had to adjust their normal channel usage. It's something that within BAI, we've had a lot of different coverage on in terms of our executive roundtables and some of the digital thought leadership that we have offered. And, you know, one of the ways that we've looked at this issue is by conducting some different surveys in the market. So as I help facilitate the conversation today, I'll be sharing some research that is from our BAI Banking Outlook survey on digital that we did to better understand some of the trends that were impacting financial services leaders as well as consumers in different ways. So we'll jump right in. And just a reminder to those of you who are listening in, you can go ahead and type questions and we will take those at the end of the discussion. But to start, I wanted to pose a question to all of you and just, you know, kind of generally frame what you're seeing in this area. And as I mentioned in that BAI Banking Outlook survey that we did on digital behaviors, we found that more than half of consumers, about 52%, are using digital banking applications more since the start of the pandemic. And 87% of consumers plan on maintaining their increased usage after the end of the pandemic. So would love to hear from all of you in terms of how do you think this shift towards digital will impact financial services organizations moving forward? And Ken, maybe we can start with you in terms of your view.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Holly, and looking forward to the conversation. I think when you look at just general adoption of digital across the last couple of years, it's always been increasing. And I think you've heard from a number of folks, and I know I've talked about it in other forums where, you know, the pandemic really served as an accelerator of a lot of digital strategies and digital adoption. But when we think about, you know, even where we were pre-COVID, and you think about, you know, Truist and what we were planning on doing, and part of our merger even was really around accelerating that digital journey and that digital transformation and looking for ways to provide, you know, digital capabilities to our clients across, you know, multiple channels. So we definitely see it as an accelerator. I think, you know, we'll continue to see different trends, but a lot of the increase in usage started pre-pandemic and has continued, and I think it's here to stay.
Great, thanks, Ken. Allyson, how about you? What are some of the things that you're seeing more broadly?
I think I echo Ken on a lot of those points. I think the other point you're seeing, what is first defining what are those consumers of yours, whether they're consumers or corporates. Coming on the corporate side of the bank, when you look at digital, has been a much slower adoption, right? I think you usually see the movement on consumer side, then shifting up into the B2B or larger corporate side, always a bit following in the wake. So it has been a bit slower with adoption. I think it's increased a ton more when you think about the way you open bank accounts for large corporates. And when you think about doing that globally, a lot of those are still very manual, still very document heavy. A lot of those jurisdictions outside the US you have to take into account are still moving to that point too, right? So you're looking at it in a multi-market standpoint, even the point of a wet signature, right? How fast has that been adopted across the US or across the globe? And so we're seeing a lot more move on that. You can't get into branches. You talk about checks, like it's a basic point, checks being still widely used. If treasurers can't get into their corporate offices to print checks, how has that shifted more the digital adoption of different types of digital payment methods, really? And so you've seen a lot of that pick up on the consumer side, now even more on the corporate side, because of the times of you're at home and you're doing it on your own computer here. You're not able to get in and manage things in your usual way of working corporate. And so you need to be able to do that more digitally. And so I think that there's been a huge shift on that. I think it's a while coming. I don't think it's going away. I think also shifting onto e-commerce and the move onto that front. So a lot of the different digital ways they're enhancing on there and building websites away from their traditional retail shops. So I think you're seeing a ton of movement there. Coming from the corporate side, I've always been interested in seeing when that adoption would come, and it's just picking up.
Yeah, great points. And you do, I know, a lot of work on that corporate side. So it'll be interesting as we have our conversation to talk about some of the consumer, behaviors, as well as what we're seeing more on the commercial side of the house, and how, they were maybe in a more, just call it traditional, setup or operational mode in advance of the pandemic. Dibs, what are your thoughts in terms of, some of those shifts that you see through your role and your view at Comcast? And I think we've got you on mute, Dibs. There you go.
Yeah, I think we are seeing 2 or 3 different things here. The very first thing is that with the pandemic, from the infrastructure perspective, we are starting to see a lot of financial institutions, and not just financial institutions, but a lot of other corporate companies as well, were starting to move their workload into the cloud. So that's a big shift that always coming in. And the other shift that we are starting to see is not just from the infrastructure perspective, but from personal consumer perspective. If you look at the trading volume that's happening right now, right? A lot of people at home, the trading volume is just going very, very high. And most of the trading volume is actually now starting to shift towards the newcomers, the startups like Robinhood and those kind of companies, right? So, and in addition to that, there is other shift where the personal banking, the personal consumer aspect of the things, right? There's a shift between the fintech startups versus going towards a much larger corporation kind of thing. So those are 3 different type of shift that we are starting to see due to pandemic, or acceleration because of the pandemic.
Great. Thank you, Dibs. Appreciate that. Ken, let's talk a little bit more about, Truist specifically, how you've seen the pandemic impact retail, commercial banking through this lens of digital banking at Truist.
Yeah, so I kind of echo a lot of Allyson's comments. I think, originally when you think about adoption of digital, retail usually is a little bit of ahead of some of the commercial side. And when we look at the pandemic, retail was probably easier to pivot and look at ways of interacting digitally a little bit easier because the adoption has been there. But even for us, when we looked at our retail clients, they had needs that we needed to fill very, very quickly, right? And so the idea of the mass and the scale of our retail client base really had an impact on the types of solutions that they needed. So whether it was looking at how to provide payment relief options very, very quickly to them digitally, so that way they didn't have to go into a branch and put their health and safety at risk, or sit on hold for a really long time in a contact center. Dibs talked about leveraging technology. We leveraged AWS Connect to help with callback solutions very quickly, and with the scale of the cloud to help when it came to things like contact centers. Or even when you really think about just the different ways that digital spans across channels. And we looked at our branch network and just the simplicity of needing to schedule an appointment to assure that we didn't have a line of people standing outside of a branch. Being able to deploy those types of solutions pretty quickly were critical as we look to support the retail client. And then on the commercial side, I think the reality hit pretty quickly, especially when you look at the things like the PPP program. And I think those institutions that embraced looking at a digital end-to-end solution were clearly those that were able to support more of their clients during that time. And so, we found really quickly that we felt like we needed to provide a solution that was fully digital enabled through, origination all the way to fulfillment of those products. And we were able to leverage great partners and some great collaboration across the company to really kind of deploy it in an MVP fashion and continue to make it better. And it landed us in a really nice place to help a lot of really struggling small businesses that needed our help. And speed mattered. And to think that we were able to deploy a solution in 10 days with changing requirements and everything else is a pretty phenomenal accomplishment as a company. But it was something that was required because our clients needed it. And I think their adoption of those digital experiences, I think just the fact that we were able to provide that to them as quickly as we were, also allowed for some grace, right? So that way those clients that maybe not have been as familiar with some of these practices were slightly more accepting towards understanding how to really engage.
Great. And on the PPP front, Ken, are you able to now use that same technology in this forgiveness phase that you're looking at, or did you have to implement any additional technology as you've entered this section of the program?
Yeah, so I mean, we continue to leverage a lot of the things that we built. The good news is that we've been able to establish really strong architectures and patterns that allow us to reuse a lot of the things. And as I think about, some of the key lessons learned and things that we're really focused on moving forward is, how do you build once and deploy many? How do you create a flexible architecture technology-wise that allows you to reuse and not necessarily have to rebuild every time the world changes or you need to pivot. The idea of being agile is not just around methods. It's also around architecture. It's around how you work. It's around how you ultimately interact with your business partners. It's a lot broader, and we've been able to do quite a bit of reuse across the board, and largely because we've tried to continue to modernize, as Dibs mentioned earlier, whether it's leveraging current technologies or emerging technologies to be able to put us in a position to be flexible.
Yeah, I think that's a great mantra. Build once, deploy many. So I think that's definitely a good takeaway. One additional follow-up question for you, Ken. So certainly in addition to the pandemic, you're still working through, I imagine, a pretty significant merger, a very public merger. A lot of eyes on you all and what you're doing. What do you think, the enablers were, those foundational elements that allowed Truist to be able to respond so quickly and have the magnitude of change that you've been able to deploy?
It's funny because I think, anytime you go through a big merger like this, culture usually becomes one of those things that everyone's really questioning and trying to understand how are the fits going to work and is this going to come together? And I think, when you get faced with a pandemic, your culture really kind of becomes front and center and people really understand what you're all about. And I think, if nothing else, the idea of making sure that we put our clients first and we're really focused on the outcomes of helping our clients and living our purpose every single day, it truly did come out in how we worked with one another. So, everybody coming into work, when you're working as quickly as you are and really trying to help your clients, you take your legacy or heritage badges and you put them to the side and you start to really work with one another and build those relationships really quickly. So that was a huge benefit just in how we work together and bringing product and design and engineering together and deploying in agile ways of working. I think it accelerated, frankly, a lot of the work that we aspired to do as a new company. But then, as I mentioned earlier, I think, making sure that you're not only engineering things properly, but architecting them properly up front to allow that flexibility. We looked at all of the things that we're doing for Truist go forward and really made sure that we had the eye on not just, building better experiences for them today, but also how do we continue to be on the leading edge of those experiences for the future. And unless you're taking into consideration current and emerging technologies, you're going to architect yourself into a corner and won't be able to be as agile.
Sure. Yeah. And, great point about culture. And, Allyson, I'll, come over to you. Citi certainly has a great culture as well in terms of innovation. And when it comes to building or growing digital competency, a lot of times organizations face this classic build versus buy decision. I know we chatted a little bit in advance of this call, and you also talked about a third option and also like a consortium type of model, or, there are some more unique collaborations that are happening, I think, especially right now. What do you think it's important for organizations to look for in partnerships to create a better digital banking offering?
Yeah, I think it goes to two things, right? So one, going back to who are those clients of yours, right? Are they the consumers, the corporates? And if they're corporates, where are they along that spectrum, right? And then two, how instrumental are some of those deliveries on those needed capabilities in your own long-term business plan, in your own long-term business model? Where are you best situated with your banking tech and product resources? and ultimate ownership, right? And so I think a lot of those, if you go on a lot of these digital banking fronts, the knowing who you're banking and knowing your client or customer, a lot of that can be rooted in, data warehousing and data lakes internally, right? And amassing a lot of that data in-house, so you start building that composite summary of that client in-house. Those are things you own. These are the things you're working on internally. If you're looking at a lot of these front-end digital solutions, maybe you need the opportunity to modularize as things advance, as the technology advances and different types of biometric capabilities become available, fraud detection, et cetera. Those are things you want to be able to migrate with the times and the way the world is evolving. I think it's instrumental in those ways to look at partners who have developed a niche capability and expertise in those areas and aligning those to be integrated with your own systems of record and the own ways that you're doing and collecting with your clients. So I think that there's a key piece on being open in a type of plug and play, modularized offering in that capability. The consortium area is interesting from a Citi standpoint. When you look particularly at ecosystems where it involves a lot of players, so it's not a one-to-one interaction usually, right? Otherwise, you're enabling that on a kind of a direct capability. But if you're looking at a larger ecosystem, whether it's global in scope, multi-party in scope, I think the consortium plays can be very effective if done well, right? And so I think particularly looking at global trade, you have multiple players involved, multiple buyers across the value chain, multiple types of documentation that's passed along the different shipping agents or agents there. And there's a large degree of need for trust, particularly in those ecosystems, right? So how do you look at joining areas where you bring a value add to your client base? You're bringing in your systems of record and your know-how into joining a consortium of that level. And so we've entered in and launched, particularly over the past couple years, consortium focused around the global trade arena. There's a ton of friction there. May not be seen as something like a digital banking experience, but very much on a digital banking core to be having to shifting to something that's digitally enabled, right? And you're enhancing that trust and transparency through looking in types of consortiums. And so I think that it's just a method of ownership and where do you bring in the greatest benefit to your clients through joining different types of methods of partnering.
Great. Yeah, some great points. And, Dibs, maybe you could build off that a little bit on, Allyson spoke about just these different models, successful partnerships. Can you talk a little bit more about the role of network infrastructure, which is another important element in supporting digital banking, and how it helps bring everything together in the ecosystem?
Yeah, sure. I think, in this regard, what Ken mentioned earlier and what Allyson was talking about, there are multiple dimensions in terms of how the network infrastructure plays a role for the digital banking and for the digital transformation in general. So the very first thing is security, right? Can a consumer or the user put a trust in your infrastructure, in your banking applications, right? And what that means is, are you building and maintaining a secure network and systems? Are you protecting your customer data? Are you running vulnerability management programs? Is your information security policy up to speed with those kind of things, right? So those are part of the security aspect of the things, and that's one big dimension to enable the digital transformation and enable the digital banking. The second one is more about network and connectivity, right? Is the corporate network today, the topology that we are using today, is it in line with the evolution of how the wide area network, how the WAN is actually progressing, how the actual traffic patterns are changing, where the branch locations need to access the cloud applications and need to have access to internet directly rather than coming all the way into the hub location and then going out, which introduces lots and lots of latencies and so forth, right? Do you have the business continuity in place to provide 100% availability for any of those applications, right? And do you have access to gig speed network in all your footprint, wherever you are, wherever your branch locations are? Do you have access to gig speed? And then on top of all of this, can you manage the network cost effectively? Because we know how much cost pressure the networks, the applications, all the C-level folks are in. So can you manage the network cost effectively, right? So those are two big dimensions. The third is very much about, are you monitoring and managing the user experience, right? Because that's a big one, right? If If a user is trying to access an application or an app or through the mobile app and so forth, the user experience is very important. And because if any of the digital experience doesn't work very well, then the user is not going to be using that application, right? So are you monitoring that? Are you eliminating the latencies that comes with the digital experience or any kind of transformation there? Are you enabling the network and applications to be extremely highly available? Are you shooting for 100% availability, right? So those are the three big dimensions. And the very fourth one is, overall, you need to provide, consumers are everywhere. They're working from home, they're working from somewhere else. Allyson, for example, is stuck somewhere. So all of this called together, these applications need to be accessed from anywhere, anytime, right? So is your applications, as a user, my expectation is that I should be able to access any of the digital banking applications from a mobile app, from my laptop, from any of the locations that I'm in. So all those, and then all the different services that you're providing, you cannot have a digital experience or different for each of those services. So do you have a single pane of glass for all the services combined together, right? So those are the four big dimensions to how the network infrastructure actually plays a role in enabling the digital transformation.
Thanks. I think, really good, important foundational pieces. You touched a little bit on work from home. Anything else you would add in terms of that category, best practices that you've seen? That was such a dramatic shift. I think, all of us, I'm sure on the panel, as well as people listening in, are probably home or not where they normally would be. Anything else that you've seen that has been helpful in making sure employees are productive in this new model?
Yeah, sure. I'll give an example of what we are doing as well as what we are hearing from our customers who want us to enable things for them for the remote as well as for the home office location. So very first piece is the goal that everybody is trying to achieve is how do we provide the same level of experience for our employees who are at home as if they were at the office, right? So that's a kind of that's a goal that everybody's trying to go towards. And very first thing there is, do we have a reliable high-speed connectivity? Do you have the right amount of bandwidth available for anybody who's working from home, right? So we are seeing some companies actually trying to install or want to install a dedicated connectivity for the remote employees, for the employees who are at home. So that's a interesting dimension that we are starting to see that. And we are also seeing that if the connectivity is not dedicated, how can we manage and control and dedicate and prioritize the business application traffic over the household traffic? Mm-hmm. Right? Because just like here, anytime your video can be going out because somebody else in the household is kind of trying to access or play some video game and so forth. So you need to be able to prioritize those business traffic over the household traffic, right? The third piece is secure access via secure VPN access to the customer network, right, or your corporate network altogether. As much as possible, what we are seeing is companies trying to split that for applications that really require the secure VPN access versus applications that don't require, and how do I move those applications into the cloud, right? So they're also identifying services that doesn't require VPN access and that can be moved over to the cloud in order to introduce better user experience, because obviously we have seen many times that going over the VPN, sometimes you have challenges, right? So, mm-hmm. And in order to also reduce the number of inbound calls. So we are seeing applications such as virtual desktop being moved over to the cloud. We are seeing gateways and voice, SBCs, some of the voice applications starting to expose externally. So rather than trying to VPN in, you can expose directly or access directly over the internet. So those are 3 or 4 different major trends that we're starting to see, or in terms of formulating of best practices. That's what we're seeing.
Great, thanks, Dibs. Very, very helpful. Want to talk a little bit more broadly about innovation. We've talked a lot, and each of you have mentioned COVID-19 as an accelerator for things that maybe would have happened 5 years down the road or things like that. They happened, very quickly. Allyson, Citi I know they have an incubator approach with Citi Ventures. In fact, BAI recognized the great work that Citi has done via this model in last year's BAI Global Innovation Awards. And I thought it'd be helpful for you to talk a little bit about how that model has been effective in driving innovation at Citi, and if there's any of the recent innovations that you think would be relevant to share with the audience, we'd love to hear that as well. And I think you're on mute, Allyson. There you go.
Sorry about that. So it's housed in two constructs, I'd say. We have a network of labs across Citi where you have business, tech, data scientists who are sitting in lab constructs in different parts of our globe to facilitate the different types of technology and needs that arise on these different fronts, right? So we've got, and we actually launched that over 10 years ago, the first one in Dublin right after the financial crisis. So that was a big kind of footprint on saying, committing to launching this still in the aftermath of that and committing to looking at innovation in terms of a hub that promotes development, co-creation, client work, et cetera, in the lab construct. The Accelerator was born 2013 and we're housed in Tel Aviv. Specifically more of the exactly what it is, an accelerator type with 4-month type sessions, bringing in a select amount or group of startups to nurture, mentor, expose to different SMEs within the business. So it's a lot more of a dual growth type of facility out in that construct, right? And so we've had 68 total come through the program. So it's very, very focused and very coordinated. And I think what was instrumental about that one is you're taking a stance in an area with a lot of expertise in markets, such as cyber, AI, ML that you see coming out of Israel. And how do you foster and grow a type of community and business construct to help solution for the needs that Citi has, right? So you're really you're opening the kimono a lot more in terms of here's where our great needs are, here are our risk concerns, here's the moving type of cyber protects issues we have. How do you, from your background and a lot of the universities and the training there, can develop something to help a solution for it? So it's definitely much more of a give and take in that construct. And we're well plugged in across our global networks on the Tel Aviv lab and, raising up kind of newer types of needs from the business when, like these digital needs evolve and you see the type of innovation and demands evolve, it demands a newer type of technology, right? And so we'll work very closely with the lab on saying, hey, we're really seeing this hurdle coming up with specific clients in this part of the world, right? What do you have within your book of work? Or perhaps it sounds like an adjacency. Can we work on tweaking it to help solution here and testing it? And so we'll bring kind of the babies out of there into a lab where you're more of the, working on an infrastructure integration, testing out and validating it. So they do work very much hand in hand. We do quite a lot of POCs and pilots, those that aren't what I'd call external. But we've had a couple things out in market, I think, not necessarily the accelerator. I think a lot of the ones we've had in market are perhaps later stage coming out of there, such as an internal machine learning, payment outlier detection solution, something that was built very much within the labs and, kind of internal teams, but now bolted on to an external fintech provider. Because we realize there's the new changing nature of payment fraud, we need to be partnering with some of these niche players, right, that are able to detect that and have built specific capabilities for there. So I think it's a great give and take, and a lot of very openness on that front. Being very open about the types of parameters we need to work in. So it's not reinventing any wheels, perhaps, but very much saying these are the guardrails we work in. How can we do something better within it? And how can you help?
Thanks, Allyson. Yeah, and certainly there are a number of organizations that have that incubator set up, but I think you mentioned just some other good points just in general of how to think about it, how to work through it, that even if you're at an organization that doesn't have a formal incubator, you could, glean some of those insights. So thank you for sharing. Let's talk a little bit about fraud, and a question that I want to talk to, get views from all of you on, because certainly you're probably seeing it from different angles. That was another area that we asked about when we did our BAI Banking Outlook study on digital banking. And we found that 38% of consumers across all generations report that their biggest frustration with digital banking remains the fear of fraud and security concerns. So, your old school, folks, regardless of age, frankly, that really like going into the branch, like talking with that personal banker that they've gotten a relationship with. a lot of anxiety over this digital channel. Would love to, just go around and get some insights from all of you in terms of what fraud trends that you've seen emerge within your lens and the part of the organization you serve. And then how can financial services leaders and technologists work together to solve this? Because I do think it's, something that unfortunately the bad actors are, capitalizing on, every weakness that they see. So Ken, maybe we can start with you in terms of what you're seeing at Truist in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that the bad guys aren't going to stop coming as we continue to deploy solutions to protect our clients. So, they're constantly looking for every single loophole and every single opening that they can. And it's our job to make sure that we're taking our client security as table stakes, right? You cannot fall down on the job when it comes to the client of your the security of your client and their data and their information and ultimately their personal wealth. So, we've continued to make that kind of first and foremost. So we do not allow any type of shortcuts to be taken when it comes to how we're securing our clients' information. I would say that to your point around the cooperation across financial services organizations, I think a lot of that exists today. There's a lot of consortiums that are out there where, our teams are working with other organizations, especially in the cyber operations space. I mean, our collective CISO community is very, very connected. And they're making sure that they understand what's out there and what threats are out there. And we're working not only with, partner banks and different, even competitors, but I think the fintech community is increasingly important to this space as well. You think about partnerships and different vendors and cooperation type things. And a lot of the stuff that Allyson even talked about around a ventures approach and lab approaches, you see a lot of focus right now in the fraud and cyberspace. And so, for us, it's about keeping our finger on the pulse. And I think Dibs even mentioned earlier, or maybe it was Allyson, about, making sure that what you have when you are interacting with your clients, you can quickly pivot and plug and play, if you would, new capabilities, because the bad guys aren't going to say, we're going to attack you in this specific vulnerability. And we'll give you a couple of months to get it implemented and work through it, right?
It'd be nice if they did.
Yeah, I mean, it would be really nice, but they don't do that.
Right.
That's not reality. So you not only have to be proactive, but you also have to put yourself in a position to be reactive as well. So I think, our stance is really continuing to be both proactive and reactive and make sure that we all keep security of our clients and their data as a primary driver in everything that we do.
Yeah, and just to tag onto your note about collaboration and how banks and fintechs have come together, another thing that BAI does is we lead a number of executive roundtables, and normally they're in-person meetings, but when the pandemic hit, we started doing weekly calls, because these leaders were faced, all of you and others were faced with such rapid change, quick decisions, and they just wanted to compare notes. And I think we should all feel very proud, I think, working in an industry that I was amazed to see the collaboration, the openness, really for the greater good. And I think when it comes to battling fraud especially, let's just neutralize it. Let's compare notes, neutralize it, see what, who's ahead on what. So I think great point on collaboration. Dibs, how about you? What are you seeing in this area in terms of trends and anything you think would be helpful for the industry more broadly?
I completely agree with both of your points, especially the bad guys are never going to stop. They're always going to find a way to kind of be more offensive or attack to your network, attack to your applications, or try to kind of steal personal identities and so forth. The best approach is talking about how do we get security and the concept of security as a defense in depth, right? So it's more about how do we get the end user, the endpoint security going in a much, much secure manner, much better manner. And there's so many different products out there, whether it's McAfee and so forth, to kind of do the endpoint security. And then we also talk about how do we do the network-based security. And it's not either or, it's a combination of all of those things, right? Network-based security where where you are putting your antivirus, anti-spam, malware, all of that into the network itself, so that becomes the first point of entry for everybody to kind of do the scanning. Second point of entry can be your endpoint security. And then on top of that, there are security practices that everybody needs to adhere to, like, whether you're enabling multi-factor authentication kind of thing for everything that you're accessing today, right? And then the security industry is now starting to use the term of zero trust networking, right? So it's a fact about, they're going at the application level now, where they're starting to look into, hey, I'm only going to allow access to application to other API connections, to other users that are trying to access it, only if they're trusted, right? So there's quite a bit of innovation there going on from many startup companies. They're looking at zero trust networking from that angle, and I think combination of all those three is what's going to make the security as a defense in depth kind of approach.
Thanks, Dib. Allyson, what would you add to what Ken and Dibs mentioned? What are you seeing?
Well, I think it just zeroes into the whole movement now on digital identity and what does that mean, right? We have different infrastructures in place to try to catch fraud because we don't know where the money's coming from and where it's going actually, or how you're authenticating down that value chain. Where I think about it from the money capacity, right? You're thinking about who's logging in and who's actually executing the transaction. You can have it secure within your banking environment, but we work very closely with clients. We move 4 trillion a day on our rails, right? That's a huge amount to go after. So you can have a security around your banking environment, but how are you working with your clients to ensure the hack doesn't originate from their environments and come in through the insecure environment, right? So I think that that's a big issue to watch out for. And it leads more and more on that digital identity flow. How do you create, type of a unified identity for a corporate or a client, whether it's on the corporate or client side or, kind of consumer side. And we're still trying to figure out that. And then there's the whole point of behaviors. How do you integrate the behavior of you and me, which is very hard to steal, into the biometrics that we have built within our phones or our laptops, et cetera. So I think that there's a lot of work on that front to still be seen, which we're testing out and looking into. A topic came up the other day on payment fraud. When you look at the changing ways payments are being made now more and more into alternative payment methods, right, as opposed to traditional bank accounts, and then nested flows. How well are you working with your payment partners to ensure that whoever downstream is handling the payment is handling in the way they need to and looking at the parties involved? And so I look at it kind of from those three fronts and where we're thinking the different ways of where does fraud occur and what does it trickle down to and how are you mitigating these different entry points of fraud, right? And I think it's still evolving, right? And it's still a huge rampant issue because the regular banking rails have enough holes in them. They don't need to go to some sort of digital currency to do it.
Sure, absolutely. So we're just got 1 minute left. And the question I wanted to end with, just in terms of, what you're seeing for 2021 and beyond. So maybe we can do just a real quick rapid fire, start with you, Allyson, and maybe what's your number one thing you'd like to see in this area in 2021?
I think the whole topic of central bank digital currencies and stable coins is extremely interesting. Right, you've seen all the news with the OCC and Fed, global governments looking and testing out some of these. I know this isn't digital to digital banking, but it's digital currency and it's an integral part of who you and I and all of us are as banks and what we use banks for, right? Sure. And so I think personally, I'm very interested in seeing where this takes movement and how maybe some parts of the US can start taking a bit more on looking into these types of stable coins and central bank digital currencies.
Great. Thanks, Allyson. Dibs, how about you? One quick thing you'd like to see next year?
Yeah, for us, it's very much about how do we take all this concept that we just talked about from security, network, user experience, and anywhere, anytime access, and how do we fold that all into what we call as a branch office in a box solution and provide that to our customer, which is all embedded into one, where from networking perspective, highly reliable, with built-in business continuity, with software-defined wide area network, with built-in unified threat management that takes care of security, with access to the cloud applications, all that riding over a gig speed network. And that's the kind of offering that we are starting to kind of provide back to the customer that will enable the digital customer experience and digital transformation for the customer.
Great, thanks, Dib. Ken, you want to bring us home?
Sure. The most exciting thing in 2021 will be the launch of ultimately our Truist digital platform. So we are very excited to be bringing some new Truist digital branded experiences to our clients. And we're happy with all the recent recognition that we've got from our heritage platforms at both BB&T and SunTrust and Lightstream. But we're really excited about introducing our clients to Truist Digital.
Great. Well, we are up on time. So Ken, Allyson, Dibs, thank you all so much. Really great information that you shared. I think it was valuable for those who listened in today. Best of luck to you in this important work that you're doing. Again, thanks to everyone who has joined this session. We hope you enjoy the rest of the FinTech South conference. Have a great day.